The Liberals tried to turn the table on the Tories today in the ongoing moving expense controversy. Late yesterday, Justin Trudeau's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, and his Principal Secretary, Gerald Butts, bowed to some public pressure and repaid a portion of their relocation payments. But today, Liberal House Leader Bardish Chagger revealed that a staffer in Stephen Harper's office, the former Prime Minister's office, also filed a hefty expense claim. That one was around $93,000. So what is an acceptable limit for moving expenses? Should the government disclose all public payments for moving expenses? Joining me now, Ontario Liberal MP Marco Mendocino, Conservative Natural Resources critic Shannon Stubbs, and NDP House Leader Peter Julian. Thanks for being here in person. That's fun.
Thank you, Rosie.
Okay, Marco Mendocino, stories changed a little bit since we talked yesterday, and we also discovered that under the Harper government from 2005 to 2015, there was about $325,000 reimbursed for PMO staffers and moving expenses. We compare that to what happened inside your PMO, one government, less than a year, two people, over $200,000. Is there a different approach to how public money is being used?
Well, I think at the end of the day, there will be a better approach, and that's why today in the House Leader, Minister Bardish Chagger, talked about the Prime Minister's leadership and commitment to reviewing the rules which have been in place now for, I think, 30 years, if not a little bit more than that. But I want to sort of touch on something that I think that's important in this conversation, and that is the rush to judgment and the rush to sort of resort to the politics of personal attack. Because after all, we are talking about two public servants, and these are people, and there is some sacrifice involved in uprooting your families and asking your spouse to change jobs and your children to change schools. And so I think Canadians understand that, and that's why these policies were put in place in the first place, which was to compensate people for legitimate out-of-pocket expenses so that they could come and work hard for them. So notwithstanding that, and notwithstanding the fact that the rules, there has been no breaking of the rules, and I think we're all in agreement about that, that on reflection, and you saw the statement yesterday from Mr. Butts and Ms. Telford, that there will be some reimbursement of those expenses which didn't go directly to third parties for the purposes of the move. There will be a review of the policy.
I take that you're calling them public servants, but I think it's important to distinguish. They are political staff doing public jobs at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. They are not public servants like bureaucrats. So answer this question. This review, will it be for exempt staff, political staff, or will it be for the whole of government, for all public servants?
Well, I think that is a decision which will be taken in the fullness of time. I don't want to sort of prejudge what the parameters of the review will be, but I know that there's a commitment to take a look at the rules to continue to deliver for Canadians when it comes to openness and transparency about how their taxpayer dollars are spent, and we're committed to doing that.
Okay, Shannon Stubbs, there was one case under the previous Conservative government with Mr. Harper where someone was reimbursed $93,000 for a move. Was that an acceptable use of taxpayers? Who's to say what the limit is?
I think what's really at issue here is that over the past year, and we're coming on about a year now, the Liberals being in government, they're the government now, the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister now, and he needs to make decisions in the best interests of Canadians. Over the last year, hundreds of thousands of Canadians have lost their jobs. They're struggling to pay their bills. I think they can be forgiven for wondering how it can be that staffers can be provided taxpayer-funded expenses of literally hundreds of thousands of dollars that's often represents more than most Canadians even make in a year, more than they themselves spend on housing.
I get all that messaging, but if we're trying to understand what is acceptable and what is not, I think it's a fair question to compare to one staffer in the previous government who was given $93,000 to move. So if you're going to criticize this move, then you have to be willing to defend that one.
I think Canadians want the current Prime Minister and the current federal Liberal government to be accountable and transparent with them, just in the same way that they campaign. So,
sure, but where is the cutoff? 93,000 is as high as you're allowed to expense?
Well, I think the problem is we don't really know. There's such a lack of information around this, right? You know that the answers from the Liberals changed over a couple of days in terms of when the rules were put in and what date. And then there's this question around these personalized cash payouts and incidentals. And I think that's the area where the one staff member says that he now feels uncomfortable, although the other staff member isn't paying those back.
Oh, I think they're both paying those back.
Okay.
Yeah, they're both paying the personal incidental
And
part
then they
back.
said
Yeah.
they're not asking any of the other exempt staff. So then the question becomes, well, how many exempt staff are getting those personalized cash payouts, whatever that means, and what kind of numbers are those?
What is the money used for, I guess? I mean, I think my understanding of that would be things like cable hookups and you know, maybe getting your mail moved, but I don't know. You're right, I don't have the answers to that.
So it's just really crucial, though, because Canadians are losing their jobs, their businesses, their homes. They're barely able to pay their bills. That's why this is so concerning.
Okay, Peter Julian.
I'm just disappointed that the Liberal government saying that it would be different and bringing real change in is now in a competition to see if they're a little bit better, a little bit worse than the former Harper government. And Canadians spoke very clearly a year ago. We're not seeing a lot of changes. And the limousine scandal we had a few months ago, the scandal around the amount of money that this government is investing in photographs of itself and videos of itself is problematic. And now we have this expense scandal, because that's what it is.
Why is it a scandal when it was allowed?
Well, because the Prime Minister allowed it. The Prime Minister had the discretion to say, this is not an appropriate expense, and chose to allow it. Millions of Canadian families move every year, and they don't run up bills of $126,000 for their move. I can tell you, I moved across the country for $7,000.
So what?
And I think most Canadian families are very prudent to try to reduce those costs.
I mean, I don't know what the limit should be, and I think that's sort of the problem. We're all using personal judgment on what the limit should be. So what they've decided to do, paying back these amounts of incidentals, is that satisfactory for you, or should they have done more?
Well, it still raises questions. There are some of the amounts that still don't make a lot of sense, like the amount of money, which seems very, very high for temporary lodgings. Those are kinds of questions that I think the Prime Minister needs to answer, as well as answering why he approved it. When obviously we're now hearing both of his staff members saying this was inappropriate and wanting to pay it back. Why did the Prime Minister approve those expenses?
Well, and also, I think, feeding off of your point, in the statement from Mr. Butts and Ms. Telford, they write the following: as this process relates to us, we were eligible to be reimbursed for a bunch of costs that we don't feel comfortable about. They go on, well, the rules were clear and we followed them. We both know that's not always enough. So when did they become uncomfortable with the expenses, Mr. Mendicino? Was it when they were made public? Were they comfortable before anybody knew about them?
Well, I think that there was an ongoing reflection about it, and certainly the public nature of this discussion brought the matter to a decision point, which was posted yesterday. And look,
but that sort of begs the question: if we didn't know that it had happened, they would have just gone ahead with the expenses, and there wouldn't be any paying back or any decision to review.
Well, I think if the broader comment is, are we raising the bar on openness and transparency, you could look to an array of examples that are put forward by our government when it comes to the publishing of mandate letters, when it comes to responding to questions with the media, when it comes to speeding up the time, when it comes to access to information.
But in this instance, the only reason that you're making a change is because it became public.
Well, you're suggesting that, and I know.
Well, I have no proof point to the contrary.
I don't agree with that proposition, and all I'm saying to you is that I think we have to look at what the big picture is when it comes to the overall standard of openness and transparency.
So let's take that point, and if that were true, then why are you not applying that, as Mr. Butts and Ms. Telford said in their letter, why are you not applying that same principle to other exempt staff who were paid moves?
Well,
why do they not have to pay back or be public about what they had?
Well, look, the important thing is that there has been an acknowledgement, and you could rush to judgment on it, and this is a point that I was making earlier, but we are showing a receptiveness to some of the sensitivities around this discussion. And I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that there are many Canadians who are continuing to suffer in a fragile economy. We want to focus on those priorities. We want to focus and do more when it comes to helping the economy recover, when it comes to climate change and the environment, when it comes to opening up free trade with our partners around the world. And we recognize that there is some time that is being spent on this issue.
Yes.
That's not a bad thing. We're prepared to have this discussion, and we're prepared to raise the bar on that. But we also want to get back to work for Canadians.
Okay, so then, but if you're raising the bar, my question to you too would be: should it just apply to all exempt staff? Should they all have to have their moving expenses published, made public, reconsider paying back some of the things that may not be appropriate, as the Chief of Staff and the Principal Secretary have suggested, and perhaps have the rules changed for them as well? Shannon.
Well, I think this really comes back to a point that you made earlier, and you did as well. It really is about judgment and about discretion. I'm not a big fan of attacking individuals personally, but this is the case. The Prime Minister and these ministers, very early on, after running a campaign, criticizing these kinds of things, and you know, some of the first things that they did was sign off on expense claims like this, hundreds of thousands of dollars for staff, for moves from Toronto to Ottawa. So, you know, that's really what's
But again, they didn't break any rules, right?
It's amazing to Canadians, though, that it wouldn't raise any red flags or wouldn't seem inappropriate, particularly in the context of now a year into the new mandate of hundreds of thousands of Canadians losing their jobs and barely able to make ends meet.
Except it was an independent firm that was managing their move, that was signing off on expenses as per the rules that were there. What were the staff supposed to do? Say, no, I don't want the money?
I think this really needs to be about the people who are approving the expenses, which is the Prime Minister and the ministers. That's why this current Liberal government needs to be accountable for the decisions they're making now.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure the Prime Minister signed off on every expense that went through for his Chief of Staff, but okay. Peter Julian.
Well, but his office was justifying it for a number of days and saying this was absolutely legitimate.
Within the rules, yeah.
And the rules are the rules subject to the discretion of the minister, in this case the Prime Minister.
Fair point.
Which means it circles back to him. And this is what is perplexing to me, because he did campaign on openness and transparency, and he's refused to answer questions on it. The government has stonewalled. They really haven't responded except through social media. And so the kinds of questions that are being asked are legitimate. They were legitimate when we asked them the Conservative government. They are legitimate when we asked them the Liberal government. And we're seeing unfortunately, a similar pattern of pushing back and stonewalling rather than responding to legitimate questions.
Do you think it should be applied to other exempt staff, some of these other higher moving expenses we're seeing in other ministers' offices?
Yes, though I would suggest any caps that we put in have to be caps that make a clear distinction between a move a few hours down the road from Toronto to Ottawa and a move across the country from Yellowknife or Vancouver Island or Newfoundland Labrador.
I can't agree with Peter that there's been any stonewalling at all. We've been nothing but responsive and timely.
No, Mr. Mendocino, that's not true. You went from saying you followed the rules and nothing else to suddenly...
Which is still true.
Yes, but to the Chief of Staff and the Principal Secretary apologizing and reimbursing the money. So obviously something changed, and my guess is the something was the public pressure and the perception of things.
Well, again, that's something that you're certainly entitled to put forward.
What else changed?
Well, look, the ongoing reflection about these expenses, and the point is not whether or not there was a reflection and a change in the position about the amount of expenses that were going to be claimed, but how long it took to have that reflection. And all I'm suggesting is that there wasn't like a protracted stonewalling here, that rather there was a rather quick sensitivity to the ongoing public nature of this discussion. And I think that contributes to the high bar of openness and transparency that Canadians want from their government and that we're delivering.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you, everybody. Peter Julian, Shannon Stubbs, Marco Mendocino. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rosie.
Thank you.